What if Deku had a elastic slash rubber quirk? How would this affect the My Hero Academia story? And is Izuku going to be just like Luffy? No, he's not. To answer that question, he's actually going to be based off of the character Mr. Fantastic from the Fantastic Four. Now, a lot of people actually underrate this character, and I figured that the dynamic that he has with those other three characters could very much so be replicated in the world of My Hero Academia. So I decided that I would be taking a spin with this what if and seeing how it would perform in the algorithm. That said, if you guys want to see a second part of this, definitely let me know by smashing that thumbs up button. And with all that out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
We start our story off in the perspective of Izuku. Everything would have been going just like it does in canon up until the age of about 4 to 5 years old. It would be on this particular day that Izuku would be thinking to himself that not everybody's created equal, and Deku would have had a fascination with that, wondering what to do with those who are quirkless, since one of his good childhood friends was actually born that way, by the name of Katsuki Bakugo. And after hearing that, you guys are probably like, hey yo, what do you mean born quirkless? Like Bakugo quirkless? Let me get to that. So the way that I want things to work out this time is going to be a little bit more different, but trust me, we're still going to be getting a same dynamic between Bakugo getting a quirk, but just give me about 5 minutes to get to that. Moving forward, we go on to a different point in time in which we see Izuku watching as Bakugo would have clearly have been getting picked on by a couple of other kids with quirks. Now Bakugo wasn't the type of kid to shy away from the smoke, and so Bakugo would have easily been not allowing himself to just get bullied, not allowing himself to just get picked on. Bakugo stood up for himself, and Deku, watching this, immediately went to go get a teacher, having the IQ of somebody who is way older than those kids combined, seeing as Izuku was this time around was actually born with a bit of an intelligence quirk, something that is going to be enhancing his already immense IQ in the My Hero Academia story, and something that is definitely going to be proving useful for the story moving on. Izuku with this ability would be able to easily determine that the best course of action wouldn't be to rush in there and help Bakugo, but to call the teacher and catch those kids in the act, leading them to get severe punishment and then learning their lesson. And so this would happen, but considering the fact that they were picking on a quirkless kid and they didn't really have that good records, they would definitely get in big time trouble. And so because of this, those kids would stop finally picking on Bakugo. Izuku walks over towards him and asks him if he's okay, holding his hand up to Kachan, who would take it and get up, asking him why in the world he called him and why he didn't step in, saying to Izuku, you know I had them, as Deku would say, I know Bakugo, I just wanted to make sure. As from here, Bakugo looks at his direction and says, well, if anybody ever picks on you, Deku, just know that I'll be here to protect you. And Deku would say, Katsuki, I know you will. You've always been there for me, ever since we were kids, remember? As he would say, oh yeah, Izuku, by the way, I do need a little bit of help on this upcoming pop quiz that we have right now. As Deku would say, oh, it's easy, just put the shapes in the holes that they go to. And he would teach Bakugo how to do it, as bro has the most wide open stare looking at Deku, asking him how he's so smart. Izuku not quite yet understanding that he has an IQ quirk, but from here that same day he would make his way to the quirk doctor, where it would be informed that he has an intelligence quirk, a quirk that boosted his already high intelligence by a very decently significant amount. Nothing too crazy, but it definitely does boost his intellect very high. Izuku would spend his early years learning things about like physics and all of those different things, and eventually we would get to the point where Izuku and Bakugo would have just been fresh out of high school. This time around we're going to be changing the My Hero Academia world so that people finally make it to UA around the age of college. So they're all going to be around the 18-year-old level, and all of the characters are going to be aged up slightly, with them all being born a bit sooner, and so leading to all of the older characters such as All Might, Aizawa, and all of that to kind of be compensated for, right? And so because that would end up being the case, what would end up pretty much going down is that Izuku would actually end up being very smart during his high school years, and during that time he would have actually been working on a project alongside his friend Katsuki Bakugo, a science fair project if you will. Because of this, he would be recruited into UA, as Bakugo would have also had a dream into making it to that school, and Izuku would have been egging him on, telling him not to give up just because he's quirkless, but to try that much harder to show that quirkless people can make it into UA. Izuku wasn't really dreaming too much about becoming a hero, just due to the fact that Izuku wanted to save the world in different ways, make gadgets for those who are quirkless, and maybe help those who don't have the ability to have powers. And so Izuku would have created a machine that would potentially mutate people into getting quirks. But what Izuku wouldn't know is that his research was flawed, and so this machine was highly unstable. What would end up happening from here is that Izuku would end up making his way towards the area, right? As he would tell Bakugo to get inside. This is a machine that he would have been working on in the high school facility that he was in. He would be very, very highly regarded in the most prestigious high school around. And so Izuku would have access to tons of technology to play around with. Bakugo being with him would end up following Izuku towards the area, as Izuku would walk up to Bakugo with the biggest and brightest smile on his face, saying, "Kachan, I finally did it. I think I might have figured out a way to give you a quirk." As Bakugo looks to him and says, "You're kidding, Deku. There's no way." As he would say, "And don't get my hopes up that high." As Izuku turns to Kachan and says, "Kachan, I'm serious. I think I might have actually done it this time. There might be a way for you to get a quirk." As Bakugo looks to Deku and says, "Well, I'm willing to try anything. I know my dream was to become the first quirkless hero, but if I could help it, then I'll definitely take that chance." Izuku looking at Bakugo as he smiles and tells him to get into the certain box, like it would be like this container. Bakugo steps in, as he would be wearing no shirt, and these toxins would end up spreading through the air. It's at this point that radiation would go off, and because they would be in a room where radiation simply can't spread other than in that container, what would end up happening is that the malfunction would become apparent as soon as Izuku would have pressed the button to start it up. As soon as that happens, Izuku notices that the machine is starting to become crazy, and so what would end up happening is that it would explode. The explosion would lead Deku to notice everything, and because he noticed it was about to explode, he rushed over to Bakugo, trying to save him as best as he could. As it would be at that moment that the radiation would hit both himself and Bakugo, and what would end up happening would be insane, leaving both of them in critical conditions for the following first 5 months of the UA entrance exam time to train, right? And so when they finally wake up, they wonder to themselves, what's wrong? Bakugo not feeling any different, and Izuku wondering what happened. Them explaining that his little experiment, that was a secret by the way, ended up causing a lot of severe damage to that area, and as such, he was going to be losing his access to that school completely. Izuku looks down, thinking to himself that he really failed, but then he would finally come to the realization, Bakugo, asking, "Is he okay?" As the school would tell him, he's fine, but he is in critical condition still. As Deku would make his way towards the room, he sees Bakugo standing up, holding his arms and saying, well, since there's nothing else to do, I guess I might as well. As, from here, he turns to the direction of Deku and he's like, "Whoa, Deku, like, what happened? Like, I heard that we got into a little bit of an explosion." And Deku would ask Bakugo, I thought you were in critical condition," with Bakugo saying, "Oh no, don't worry about it." And what would end up happening is Bakugo would say, "I'm kind of bored. I say that I'm going to be going out for a bit," as he ends up making his way towards a mountain, a snow mountain. And so bro begins to just slide down it, having a great time, flirting up this one girl, as yes, of course, we're going to be following the main plot threads of the old Fantastic Four movie. And so what would end up happening is Bakugo, while he's mid-air snowboarding, would end up catching a flame as he noticed he was about to crash. And so Bakugo would finally begin flying through the air, realizing he has a quirk, or so he would think. From this point, Bakugo notices that he is completely covered in flames, and it would be at this moment that Izuku would try to reach out to one of the nurses to try to tell her that, she forgot to give him his medicine. As Izuku turns to the direction of that nurse and stretches his arm out, he would realize that his arm extended way further than it should normally stretch out. And Izuku turns to the direction of himself as he thinks to himself that there's no way. It worked. Izuku from this moment gets a call from Bakugo, and he would tell him, "Izuku, your experiment, it actually worked. You son of a," as he would say the word, and Izuku would say, "Meet me at my house in like 20 minutes. As both of them immediately rush towards the direction of Izuku's house, and from here, Izuku would begin running studies on them to try to see what happened, with Izuku telling Bakugo that it appears that it's not quirks. It's apparently mutations. His experiment backfiring ended up actually being a good thing. Because of that, radiation ended up going into their bodies, and that same radiation caused them to get strange abilities. Izuku apparently has the properties of rubber and elasticity now, as Bakugo has the properties of fire. Bakugo saying that he doesn't care mutation or quirk, he's going to be using this in the quirk exam. As Izuku would think to himself that both of them are definitely going to be needing somewhere to train. And so, Dagoma Beach would be the first place that comes to Izuku's mind, as he would think to himself that there has to be ways for both of them to implement their abilities and train together while still being safe. Izuku creating a fireproof suit for himself, as he would use that to pretty much spar with Bakugo, and Bakugo would definitely take it easy on Izuku. Izuku would realize that Bakugo has the capabilities of going supernova with his heat, and the ability of flame that he has is actually capable of allowing him to fly through the air and to reach levels of heat so powerful that he could actually begin to melt things around him. Izuku would tell Bakugo to make sure to keep that under control, and so for the next 5 months both students would end up training using their abilities. Izuku become a pretty much master at his rubber-like properties due to the fact that it would be like secondhand nature. Izuku found it so easy to use these abilities just due to the fact that this is something that Izuku has studied actually for a while. Rubber always kind of interested him, and now that he has the abilities of rubber, Izuku tested his quirk to its limits, or if we want to be more specific, his powers. And so, because of this, once around the period where the entrance exam would finally roll around, Izuku and Katsuki Bakugo would finally make their way there, as they both end up taking the test and actually getting a remarkable markings. Izuku and Bakugo both end up doing remarkably well on the written test, and once they make their way outside, they would realize that they were separated, going into different sections. Izuku wishing Bakugo good luck, and Bakugo issuing a challenge to Deku, saying, "Hey Deku, let's see who comes out on top." As Deku says, "It's not about a competition, Bakugo, but I'm game." As from here, both of them make their way towards their respective areas, and Izuku would begin to make his way towards the front of the gate, wanting to be one of the first people to go through as soon as it opens. However, it would be at this point that a boy with blue hair would get in his way and say, "Hey, you need to stop right now." With Izuku turning towards Ida, who would have grabbed him by the shoulder, and he would notice that Izuku's shoulder would have started stretching as Deku's body kept moving forward, and Deku would look back as he would see his shoulder had just stretched out. He would retrieve it, and Ida would ask why he's using his quirk right now, with Izuku saying that he can't really control it too well at this point, but he just wanted to make his way towards the front. Ida from here looks towards the direction of Izuku and briefly begins to apologize, bowing down as he would apologize, saying that he thought he was gonna go distract that girl over there, with Izuku saying, "Nah, I wouldn't dream of it, don't want to ruin her chances, am I right?" As Ida says, "Exactly," saying that he wishes to see him in UA someday. And from here, Izuku would wish Ida good luck as he would run towards the front of the area. From here, President Mike would be seen on the intercom as he would tell them all to go, 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 that there's no countdowns in a real battle, as Izuku would immediately, using his elastic powers, would pretty much stretch himself out over the gate and get on top of it before anybody else, before he stretches at his arm, grabbing a light pole and flinging himself up into the air. Immediately recognizing where all the robots are, as he spins his body, he twists it into a knot, and he would finally begin releasing as it unwinds, and that pressure would allow Izuku to just flat on the land on the ground without no impact whatsoever, because Izuku has noticed that if he really was to jump from a very, very high point, Izuku would land and splat all over the place, kind of like one of those splat balls that you used to see at the mall. But Izuku, using that method, was able to casually land and not deal any damage. From here, going on to create a hammer with his arm, as he goes on to throw it at the direction of 3 robots, smashing them completely. Going on to then use more of his abilities to create a little bit of a lasso, which he would use himself to ultimately wrap around the pointers, the robots, and pretty much just end up crushing them by using the force of his body to just get closer and closer and closer, kind of like a python. Going forward with the test, Izuku would begin using more and more abilities of his rubber, and he would end up wrapping around an entire robot with his entire body covering it, much like a balloon, and then pretty much just crushing, doing those same basic moves over and over, ultimately making it to the point where Izuku would finally get a grand total of 100 and something robot points, which would eventually lead Izuku to be very proud of himself. And then he would begin to run away as he hears rumbling. Noticing that that's immediately the 0 pointer, Izuku begins to go away, as then finally he hears the screams of a young girl. She would scream, "Help! Help!" Izuku hearing this would immediately know to himself that he needs to go and help her out, as from here Izuku would make his way towards Uraraka as fast as he can, and once he would end up arriving, he would knock the rubble off of her, putting her on his back as he quickly using his abilities would escape, gathering the rescue points that he would have in the original without actually having to destroy the 0-pointer and show off all of his cards. Izuku doing this on purpose as to not show everybody what he's capable of, knowing that if he does get into UA, the UA Sports Festival is going to be a very real thing, and Izuku's going to be needing to have as many cards as possible to make sure that he wins that thing. And so what ends up happening is Izuku takes her to Recovery Girl, and he would get Uraraka healed, as the very next day Izuku would meet up with Bakugo, having decided to go meet up at some sandwich shop. They end up talking to each other and asking each other what they think their scores are, with Izuku saying probably about 160 something, with Bakugo saying, "Ha, got you beat then, loser," as he would say, "I got 170 something." As Izuku would say, "Bakugo, honestly, I'm really proud of you. You've come a long way with that ability of yours." And Bakugo would thank Deku, saying that he has nobody to thank but Izuku, that if it wasn't for him, he wouldn't even have a quirk at this moment. With Deku saying that he deserved it. He more than anybody deserves a quirk. And because Bakugo's a little bit different, while he still has that hot-headed personality, he's a lot more kinder and understanding of people. Not exactly thinking of people as extras, but still being a loudmouth individual. That said though, he would be a lot more cocky and cool-headed with his quirk, and that would begin to irritate Izuku. However, being his friend and being a close friend at that, he would easily be able to talk to Bakugo about it, and so that issue would get resolved before he would develop a god complex due to his abilities that he would have newly found out that he had. That said, eventually the day of the UA would end up coming, and after both of them end up finding their exams, food would be on Bakugo, realizing that he actually ended up losing, due to the fact that Izuku ended up getting rescue points, which Bakugo had no idea was even a criteria. If he knew, he would have definitely helped out some of those losers who were out there trying to get points for themselves. As Deku says, "Bakugo, think you could tone that down?" And Bakugo's like, "Yeah, right, sorry, it's just, been feeling a bit different ever since I got this quirk." And Deku says, "You're telling me?" Bakugo, "I've been the one who's had to deal with it." As Bakugo begins to laugh and look at Deku, asking him, "What now?" As Deku says, "Well, now we have your mom pick us up and drop us off at UA." As Bakugo's like, "Oh man, I was kind of hoping that you could give us a ride." With Deku laughing and sending a laughing emoji at Bakugo, as Bakugo goes on to send him the skull emoji, and both of them end up waking up and getting ready the next day. Izuku, in classic anime fashion, would leave a full table of amazing breakfast behind as he runs out the door and gets in the car with Mitsuki. Bakugo from here would toss a bag of Mickey D's at him, as Izuku takes out a sausage egg McMuffin and would pretty much begin chowing down. Of course, sliding in that hash brown before taking that first bite, and then going on to make their way towards Yui's exam. They both pop a mint, and from here they make their way inside of the classroom. When Deku begins walking towards the desk, he sees a wide open one, as right next to that he sees that there's a uniform and nothing inside of it, or so nothing he can see, right? As he would go over towards it and try to like stick his hand through where a head would be, and a girl would end up saying, "Hey, watch out," as Izuku would look to her and be like, "Wait, you're like, there's somebody there?" And she would say, "Duh, it's my quirk. I have an invisibility quirk." With Deku asking how in the world that works, like her molecular structure shouldn't be able to. As she says, "Oh, well, I guess mine can." Going on to explain that she has an ability that can't be turned off. And Izuku looks at her before saying, "Well, isn't that annoying?" And she would say, "Honestly, it was at first, but you get used to it." With Izuku looking towards her and saying, "Ah, right, I understand. I guess that would be the case. I mean, you can't really live with something your whole life and not get used to it." As the Invisible Girl would say, "Yeah, exactly." And from here, Izuku turns to the direction of his left side, seeing a red-haired boy with a wild personality. As he goes on to say, "I'm excited. This school's gonna be so manly." As from here, a groggily voice would speak up saying, "Hey, everybody quiet down. It's been about 8 seconds and you guys need to go outside." Uraraka going on to question, "What about a recommendation? What about orientation?" As Izawa looks at her and says, "No time." Immediately, all of them end up going to the changing room, as Kirishima notes that Izuku's body is absolutely ripped, with Deku saying, "Oh, right. Yeah, it's like that because I decided to keep it that way." as Kirishima asks, what do you mean? And he says, you must have worked out like crazy for that, with Deku saying, not really, going on to pretty much shape back into what form he would truly look like if he didn't have his rubber powers. And Kirishima seeing this would be like, whoa, that's trippy, with Deku saying, you're telling me? I'm the one with the ability. Kirishima saying that his ability is so manly, and from here they would make their way outside, as Izuku begins to take note of the quirks of everybody around him, mostly taking note of the abilities of Invisible Girl, Todoroki, Momo Yaoyorozu, Kirishima, and mostly taking notes of Bakugo, seeing as he wants to make sure that Bakugo doesn't lose control. And Izuku would have been one of the first people to notice that Mr. Aizawa was really Eraserhead, one of the pro heroes who is not really too known about, but he is one of those pro heroes who definitely takes his job serious and gets the job done. That said though, Izuku would be tossed the ball at, as Aizawa would explain to Deku that he needs to throw it as far as he can in the confinements of a circle. Izuku would immediately grab the ball as he begins spinning his hands fast and faster and faster and faster, throwing the ball into Kingdom Come, as that ball would go and get a grand total of 1,000 something meters, with everybody being shocked and yelling out, "This is gonna be a lot of fun," as Aizawa turns to them and says, "Fun? Fun? You think this is gonna be fun? Huh. Let's see how fun you think it is when somebody gets expelled. Last one is getting out of here." As Izuku turns to the direction of Aizawa and wonders to himself if this is real. Looking at the eyes of Aizawa, he thinks to himself that he better not take him as a bluff and make sure that he goes all out with every single one of the tests, making sure that he stays at least in the top 3. Himself and Bakugo would end up making their way towards the top of the area, as Izuku, because of the fact that he's just as smart as Momo and he has a very diverse quirk, he would be the one who gets first place, Momo second, Todoroki third, Bakugo fourth, and the rest of the order remaining just as such as it would in canon. Eventually, the test would finally be over, and Izuku would take note of a couple of different individuals, such as Hagakure, Kirishima, and Todoroki and Momo Yaoyorozu. Finally making his way home, Izuku would receive a text, or so a notification, with fandom saying that they have a 10% off sale right now. He would think to himself, what's fandom? And so, I'm gonna tell you.
As anime fans, we love to show our support to our favorite shows by rocking anime apparel. But something I'm pretty sure we can all agree on is it's so expensive. So I've partnered up with Fandom to bring you all affordable, high quality anime merch that you are sure to love. And if you use my code Xehther at checkout, you can even get an extra 10% off the already affordable merch. Keep in mind, it does come from overseas sellers, so its sizing is going to be different since it's overseas. That said, let's get back into the video.
Jumping right back into today's story, we're going to start everything off with Izuku and everybody else walking into one of their last classes of the day, hero training. This is when a large man would enter the classroom saying, "I am here," as immediately it would be shown the All Might silhouette as everybody turns towards his direction, and from here people would start fangirling, fanboying over All Might like crazy. It would be at this moment that Izuku, turning towards the direction of All Might, seeing as he hasn't actually met him or trained with him, Izuku would totally start fanboying like crazy, as from here All Might would finally get the class to settle down, and he would then tell them what his true purpose of being here is, breaking down that he's, as you know, they saw in their acceptance letters, he's actually going to be one of their teachers, with them all being extremely excited, knowing that All Might was going to teach here, but not exactly knowing that All Might was going to teach here, you know what I mean? Not their classroom. They figured he was going to be teaching the 3rd years or something, or 2nd years, never expecting that their class was going to be the one that gets the main focus. As All Might, turning to all of the students, would say, "Ha ha ha, right," as from here he grabs a remote and tells them all to suit up, that the clothes make the pros, and to meet him outside. Immediately everybody would do so, as we get a changing montage in which all of the students come outside for the first time, and in a very cool scene they all reveal their own costumes, with the only lame one being Todoroki's, and them all eventually picking slots to see who they're all going to be fighting off against who, and what the teams are going to be for the heroes versus villains test. Now, in the original, as we know, Deku and Bakugo's relationship would have been very much so rocky, to say the least. So in that time, Izuku would have kind of been a little bit worried for Bakugo, but since this time they're best friends, I figured that it'd be kind of a cool moment if we showed off just how good their teamwork is. So Izuku and Bakugo are actually going to be facing off against Koda, the guy who can control animals, and Who should Koda be teamed up with? Oh yeah, let's say Koda and Kirishima. Let's say that those two are going to be the ones that they have to face off against, right? The battle would start off easily with everybody being in their own respective spots, with Izuku deciding that it'd be in their best interest for Bakugo to burst in through the window using his flame quirk to divert their attentions, as Izuku using his stretching abilities could go over to the top and make his way down, seeing as soon as Bakugo finds the room, Izuku could quickly make his way towards the other entrance that, is the actual one, and burst in and sneak his way towards the bomb room. Using his elasticity ability, Izuku would be able to shape his body down through the small hole that the door had and fit his entire self in through that, as he would wiggle his way towards the direction of the bomb, as Bakugo would pretty much using his fire quirk would be able to shoot flames at the direction of Kirishima, who would rush in at Bakugo trying to use his quirk to pretty much tank the attack. But seeing as this is Kirishima who's not really that experienced, would definitely begin feeling the heat. Kirishima finally having to be finally getting sent back by the flames, and Koda trying his best to help out Kirishima, but him knowing that he's not that much of an offensive person, Koda ultimately stays back and just yields, as it would be at this moment that Izuku would finally hear over the intercoms, "Hero Team wins!" As after this they make their way back towards the rest of the students, and it would be here where they end up finding out that they did well. They actually did remarkably well, with one of the people who goes over and congratulates them being Kirishima himself, as well as Invisible Girl, with him saying that they both did incredibly well themselves, that Kirishima's quirk is awesome. And Izuku would have one question for Kirishima: is that the limit of his hardening quirk? Because Izuku feels like his quirk probably could be one of the most versatile ones. Not only should Kirishima's hardening quirk do that for him, but it should in theory give him a boosted strength, he thinks, with Kirishima wondering what Izuku means. Izuku saying, well, if he technically was to harden his muscles as well, he potentially could make it to the point where they get more compact and ultimately they end up becoming 2 times stronger, with Kirishima thinking to himself that that's a possibility. Kirishima going to the gym that day, pumping some iron, and Izuku asking Invisible Girl how she really feels about her invisible status, with him asking her if she would like to potentially be able to know what she truly looks like, with Izuku saying that it would be pretty cool if she was able to, turn it on and off, right? With Invisible Girl saying that that would actually be awesome. Her explaining to Izuku that, but that's pretty much out of the possibilities. With Izuku saying not to doubt it, saying that anything is possible. And so, what Izuku would end up doing is telling Uraraka to write down his number, as bro from here would go on to invite her over towards his house, right? Where he would end up asking her multitude of questions about her quirk, and ultimately he would end up deciding that by using some of the technology that Izuku has laying around, it should be more than enough sufficient to actually do exactly what he needs. Eventually Izuku would hit Bakugo up to ask him to go buy a part, and eventually Izuku would end up remaking a machine eerily similar to the one that he used to enhance himself and Bakugo's quirk, with Izuku thinking that by using this he could potentially end up altering the genetics of her quirk and making it so that her quirk can change so that she can have more access or destroy her, with Izuku hoping that it does the latter instead of the other one, right? And so Hagakure would end up stepping into the machine as Izuku turns it on, and after having fixed some of the bugs and learning how to contain the mutation like thing, would finally end up only getting the radiation on Hagakure. It would hurt her for a brief second as she would scream out in pain, and once it would be over and the flashing of lights would end, Izuku would rush over to Hagakure as he would ask her if she's okay, with her saying that she is. Izuku seeing what she truly looks like, as he would see green hair and like these blue eyes, and Izuku, once he gets a good look at what she really looks like underneath that quirk, would literally bro would literally fall in love, with Izuku thinking to himself that that is his kind of girl. Bakugo entering the room, seeing Hagakure, and even himself thinking that she's a looker, right? With him saying that he would have never expected her to look like that. Obviously, they knew exactly what the shape of her body was, but face and hair, they had no clue. with her saying that she didn't even know those were the color of his eyes, much less the color of her hair. Grabbing onto it as she would say, I always wondered what it would look like, as it would be more frizzy just due to the fact that she really had a hard time maintaining it due to the fact that she could never really see it. She would just kind of keep it in a ponytail most of the time just to keep it out of her face. But for now, she would jump on top of Deku and thank him over and 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 over, right? As Izuku looking at her, he would notice that she pulls her phone out and texts her mom saying that she's coming home, and finally they're gonna get to see their daughter, right? As you know, Hagakure the next day goes to school, and it would be here that they would all be informed of the USJ event being held in 3 days, them all being given permission slips, and ultimately fast forwarding to that event, with Ida of course being picked as class president after Ida shows his bravery in the lunch cafeteria event in which the reporters would break into UA, ultimately leading us to the day of the USJ in which Izuku would actually find himself inside of it, as he would wonder to himself why things seem off, but not being able to quite pinpoint anything, Izuku wouldn't be able to say a thing. Eventually though, Kurogiri would appear in the middle of everything as he teleports some students away, and Hagakure would actually be teleported over to the section in which Izuku's at, right? With her actually being saved by Tsuyu as well, and Izuku being completely shocked at the fact that, you know, he can see her now, like completely like remembering that what he did was awesome and incredible. People asking Hagakure how she was able to turn her quirk off, and her just saying the truth, that it was Izuku. He created a machine that was able to alter her quirk so that she could actually gain good access of it. And people would actually end up asking Izuku if they can get some help, with Kirishima being one of the main people who would end up asking Deku that. And so what would pretty much end up happening is that Izuku would end up using his ability to just stretch them all the way towards land, and from here Izuku would pretty much run towards the direction of Aizawa, wanting to help, with Hagakure not wanting Izuku in danger, running after him, and Kirishima would be making his way towards that same direction, as at this moment Bakugo and Kirishima would both be rushing over there. It would be here where Izuku would rush over towards Aizawa with Hagakure there as well, and once the villains would begin rushing towards them, Hagakure would hold her hands out in a bit of fear as she realized that she just put up a force field. Not only that, but she put it around Aizawa and Izuku, with her wondering how in the world she did that, and Izuku saying that impossible. Like, her ability to turn on and off her invisibility isn't the only thing that she ended up gaining. She also ended up gaining the ability to create like barriers. That's awesome. And so Izuku asked her to take it down, as he and Aizawa would end up rushing the villains, taking them down, with Hagakure providing assistance and barriers for herself as to not get involved with the fight. Ultimately, what ends up happening is Ultimately, what ended up happening is that Shigaraki would get angry as he would begin scratching at his neck, screeching, "No, no, no, Nomu, kill the brat." As from here, the Nomu would blitz at the direction of, Invisible Girl, and it doing so, Invisible Girl would put up a barrier, which the Nomu would punch, and Invisible Girl would stop it with her barrier. To her surprise, as it would crack, and she would concentrate trying to fix the bubble, but the Nomu would punch at it once more. Izuku, noticing that she was in danger, would try to rush in, but that's when Kirishima would come flying in and pretty much end up trying to tackle the Nomu, setting it flying back slightly, as Izuku from here ends up lunging in the way and pretty much stretching all over the Nomu, restraining it with his ability. As Kirishima was just about to get punched, and Izuku would say, "Go, get out of here now," with Kirishima nodding, and ultimately Aizawa using his erasure quirk on the Nomu, as eventually All Might busts through the door, revealing himself and then showing that he is indeed there, right? As it would be here that All Might begins facing off against the Nomu, who would actually have his abilities restrained quite a lot due to Izuku still holding the Nomu's arms and legs in place, and so All Might would have to be careful as to where he punches, but due to the fact that Izuku's made out of rubber, it wouldn't actually hurt him, if we're gonna be honest. And so what would pretty much end up happening is Bakugo finally ends up coming in and pretty much noticing that Kurogiri was about to give All Might some trouble, would shoot his flames at Kurogiri, Kurogiri having to dodge, and ultimately a Bakugo versus Kurogiri fight going down, as Izuku would form a gigantic arm hammer thing, as he and All Might would both hit the Nomu at the same time, sending the Nomu crashing out of the building in a Team Rocket type style, as Izuku would simply watch as the Nomu would get sent out of the building, and Shigaraki would watch as he would say, "Kurogiri, get me out of here," with Izuku saying, "Not so fast," stretching over towards the direction of Shigaraki, as, it would be at this point that Shigaraki would smirk, thinking to himself that he can finally, take care of the kid himself, going over to try to grab him with all 5 fingers, as Bakugo would end up pretty much shooting flames at the direction of Kurogiri, telling Izuku to stay away. And Izuku would do so, as he would realize that Shigaraki was trying to grab onto him with his hands, right? Noticing this, Izuku would jump back, as he would be close to grabbing Izuku, and Invisible Girl would form a barrier, with Izuku turning back towards her direction, smirking, and then forming a gigantic, axe with swords and stuff, like a ball with needles all over it, right? As he would then throw it at the direction of Shigaraki, and Shigaraki would absolutely get pelted by this, as it sends him back flying. And from here, everybody would finally turn their attentions towards Kurogiri, as the entire League of Villains, the main people, would actually end up being taken out, Kurogiri not being able to help his master out, and Shigaraki being taken into custody, with All For One being heavily disappointed in him, thinking that he needs a new successor. Kurogiri, however, definitely needs to be broken out. And so there is going to be a Tartarus jailbreaking arc that's going to be taking place off screen, and they ultimately take care and pretty much end up taking Kurogiri back. However, Shigaraki would be very disappointed to note that he pretty much ended up not being taken back, and when All For One pulled up and Shigaraki saw him, he would have thought, "Master, you finally came," as All For One walks over to him and just rips the Quirk Decay out of Shigaraki's possession, taking it back and leaving Shigaraki there to deal with the cops, who would have ultimately pulled up and shot Shigaraki, leaving him for dead, as Shigaraki would have been taken care and out of the series way earlier than you guys would probably be expecting. With this not even being the end of it, and another villain that we would have seen in the movies coming into the canon of the story by the name of Wolfram, or Dr. Doom. But that's neither here nor there. That said though, continuing on the story, after the events of the USJ, they would all have about 1 week of break, as pretty much what would end up going down is they end up finding themselves in the UA Sports Festival much sooner than they would have in canon, with Deku noting during this 1 week off that he definitely needs to get into contact with Kirishima. Kirishima put his life on the line in that moment, and Izuku noted one thing for sure, that he, Kirishima, Bakugo, and Invisible Girl worked very well together, thinking to himself that maybe the 4 of them could potentially form a sort of a bond that could potentially help them all out and benefit each one of them during the sports festival that he knew was going to be coming up, due to the fact that he's smart and he definitely keeps up with this kind of information, being on par with Nezu levels of intelligence at this point, if not way more, due to the fact that he is very, very adept with technology and stuff like that, right? And so what would pretty much end up happening is during their time off, Izuku would basically get caught looking at Hagakure a bunch of times, seeing as they hung out together and trained, and everybody would kind of take notice that Izuku is definitely crushing on her. One thing that would be of definite note would be that Hagakure seems to share those same feelings for Izuku, and it would be kind of a mutual thing. If only that could actually happen in real life, y'all. But regardless, one thing that would be taken note of is that Hagakure, who would end up pretty much being there, being with Deku, and Deku, flirting her up, and them both kind of sort of establishing a bit of a relationship, one person would be left out in the dark. That being Uraraka, who would kind of just have to watch in a little bit of dismay, seeing as she would just watch as her crush kind of just was swooped off of his feet by, Hagakure, and she can't do anything, or Invisible Girl. So she learns to live with it, ends up getting a crush on someone else, that being Katsuki Bakugo. And we continue the story with them all in the UA festival. Izuku would have actually ended up being the one who was tasked with giving the speech, and he would do so magnificently. With Izuku being the winner, of course, he would be the one who would have to give the speech, and he would do so great, leading them into the race portion of the UA Sports Festival, as Midnight would immediately blow the starting pistol, and all of them would make their way towards the finish line. Izuku using his stretching ability to pretty much jump over the 0-pointer, forming a gigantic fist as he would punch straight through it, and then going on to use something similar to Luffy's Gear 4th, seeing as he is made of rubber and he could technically do it, seeing as his organs are as well. He's able to actually use the ability of, Gear 2nd, right, where he like enhances his stats due to the fact that the blood flow can go crazy, right? And so because of this, Izuku would be able to keep up with the people who are towards the front, but ultimately Izuku would end up getting 5th place or something like that, due to the fact that there was other people who were definitely capable of passing him. And of course, Deku would still get the idea of the landmines, but this time he doesn't have any platform with him to give him access to that. And seeing as fire is one of those things that could definitely harm Izuku, seeing as he is rubber, he's not going to be taking his chances too much. I mean, it has to be really high concentrated levels of heat, not just normal heat, because heat, it just makes the rubber kind of hard to control, but he can still control it nonetheless. That said, the next event would be announced as a cavalry battle, and we all know who the team is going to be comprised of. Kirishima, Hagakure, and Bakugo, who would all be in the winning team, and they would end up keeping the 1 million point headband, seeing as Bakugo would have been the one who came in first place, them being able to stay away from everybody else due to the fact that Hagakure was able to put up a shield at that last moment before Bakugo was going to before Todoroki was going to be ripping their headband away from their team. Her playing a big IQ move at the very end and saving all of them with her intellect that she would have displayed at the very end. That said though, continuing the story, we would find ourselves in the 1v1 bracket hall as Todoroki would walk over towards Izuku and tell him that he's gonna crush him, Bakugo, and everybody else that he's been working with since the beginning of the festival, with everybody wondering to themselves why it is that they're all a big group, and Izuku would say that they just work together, with Bakugo saying, yeah, they're the Fantastic Four, and Deku thinking that name definitely sticks. Uraraka would end up noting that name actually suits them very well, and ultimately Izuku would make his way towards the combat portion, where Izuku would note that his first opponent is going to be Shinso. Now what would pretty much end up going down is that Izuku, taking note of Ojiro's warning, would definitely make sure not to say a word to Shinso, simply blitzing over towards his direction and using his fist to lunge it back in a gum fist type of move as he punches Shinso right off of the stage, and ultimately Izuku would be announced as the winner, with the intercom going, Izuku Midoriya, winner! And from here, Izuku would make his way back towards the stage, where he would eventually end up telling Hagakure good luck, with her saying thanks, and from here her kissing Izuku on the cheek, saying, you did great yourself, I figured you needed a little prize, with Izuku beat red and bro passing out into straight up unconsciousness. Izuku would wake up minutes later, and it's here where Izuku would take note of what just happened. Looking towards the direction of his classmates, who would all be staring at him, Izuku would end up picking himself up as he says, I'm fine. And Hagakure would be giggling to herself, as the rest of the boys would be looking at the direction of Izuku, and Mineta would be looking at him over his chair thinking, he's so lucky. As from here, Izuku goes on to look at the direction of, Aizawa, who at this point would tell him to just pick his agency already, and Izuku would do so. From here, Izuku ends up still deciding to take a different path. I was actually about to say that he goes with Gran Torino, but then I realized he doesn't even have a connection with All Might, so why would he even go with Gran Torino? So instead, I think that the best choice is going to be just Izuku picking a hero like Best Genius. So ultimately, we're going to be having a little bit of a funny arc in which Bakugo and Izuku would both end up going towards Best Genius. Now, it's going to be funny for Izuku just because he gets to witness everything that Best Genius does to Bakugo, and Izuku would honestly not really mind this stuff, noting that his time here is mostly going to be spending learning how to run an agency and make sure that whatever it is that he does in the future, it's gonna be right. Izuku would learn a lot of things from Best Genius, and Bakugo would be thinking to himself that he definitely wasted his time here, that Best Genius is not here to help him and just to hold him back. Izuku saying that if he was to truly pay attention, he'd realize that Best Jeanist is actually helping them out a ton, going over to nudge Bakugo in the face and say, "Huh, especially you, seeing as he's setting you straight from all that cockiness that's been running through you lately." And Bakugo saying, "Whatever, I earned it. I mean, it's not like I got the chance to be like that all my childhood. Everybody was always downplaying me." And Izuku said, "Humble yourself before somebody else has to do it for you, Bakugo. You trust me, you don't want somebody else to humble you. So definitely consider trying to humble yourself." Bakugo looking at the direction of Deku, looking away, as from here, Izuku would make his way towards the direction of Best Jeanist and the rest of the other people, when he would be through the phone and he would hear that Hosu City is currently getting attacked, with him saying that there's nothing they can really do. That said, Stain would end up actually still fighting off against Ida, and Ida would still end up actually getting hurt by Stain very, very badly. Now, I'm going to be saying that Stain this time around doesn't kill Ida, just because I don't really want to deal with that. So instead, I'm going to be saying that he kind of paralyzes Ida, right? He gets him in a state where Ida kind of dies. And you guys are probably like, "Yeah, like already, bro? Like he's already going to die?" But think about it. Like, Ida was doing this to himself. He went over to try to fight the guy who killed his brother, and nobody told him to. Ida realistically could have just not done that, but Ida chose to. And now, Ida has to deal with the consequences of not being able to run for the rest of his life. Or so he would think. Once Izuku catches wind of the fact that Ida lost his ability to run due to the fact that his spinal cord was injured, Izuku ended up doing as much research as he could into the subject and ended up finding a way to reverse that, making it so that Ida's quirk could potentially become something else. And Izuku would use the same process that he used on Hagakure and Kirishima to essentially end up healing Bakugo, Ida, doing a little bit of a reverse, using the radiation in a good way to fix up Ida's molecular structure, leading it to the point where he gave him kind of a little bit of a regeneration ability and performed the surgery on Ida, which Nezu ended up asking Recovery Girl to do. And with that, with her recovery process and with Izuku's like radiation and stuff, Ida's bones were able to recover perfectly fine, and so he wouldn't be taken out of the hero game for more than 2 months. During those 2 months, however, the heroes would have ended up having the forest training arc, and they would have even ended up having the final exams arc, in which Izuku ended up actually doing pretty well, actually ending up getting matched up with Kirishima, who Kirishima would be his partner, and using that ability, Izuku would be able to use Kirishima's immense strength and his hardening ability to combat All Might almost perfectly. Izuku using his stretching abilities to pretty much be able to pretty much tank all of All Might's blows. Seeing as All Might has, brute force and all that, Izuku has something that All Might wasn't expecting. A little bit of a shock absorption factor, considering that his body is made of rubber. So when All Might ends up ultimately punching Izuku's body was able to pretty much send him back flying due to the fact that he's getting an equal and opposite reaction. So he got punched and Izuku's stomach went inwards, and the rubber properties ended up sending All Might just crawling back fighting, right? And so Kirishima was able to jump up into the air, hardening the top of his head and just slamming it right into All Might, as All Might would instantly get knocked out or knocked back long enough for Izuku to use himself as a little bit of a slingshot or a rubber band, and using 2 poles would end up stretching himself so far that he would slingshot himself towards the finish line. All Might shooting a blow at Izuku, which would be full of air, and Izuku dodging it by moving his body around mid-air, making his way past the finish line and ultimately getting the dub for the heroes. It'd be a pretty easy and not too crazy little event. And what would end up happening after this is we end up just getting a brief moment in time in which they go to the mall and stuff, and eventually they go through the forest training arc. Except this time around, during the forest training arc, nothing would happen. It's just relaxing from here, straight up smooth sailing. Nothing wrong could have happened at this point, right? And so what pretty much ends up going down is that Izuku just did some normal training, helped his other classmates out, and would even have ended up helping out Aizawa and the pro heroes with training regimens for everybody with their quirks. Izuku coming out with some brilliant ideas in order to help them strengthen their quirks. And so everybody in UA would pretty much get a little bit of a insane boost to their quirks. due to the fact that Izuku was there to help them all out with that. And so they all ended up getting a lot stronger, and Koda sadly doesn't get that little character development that he definitely was needing. Considering Izuku, he's not going to save him this time, seeing as there's nothing to save. But Izuku and the so-called Fantastic Four would be doing their own separate training on their own, making sure that they were capable of making it past and training together, right? And so they would end up making combination attacks, and Izuku would end up deciding that their group could potentially end up forming their own hero agency, with Izuku being at the top of it, seeing as he's the smartest, and the rest of them, listening to his plan, seeing as he's the one with the brains. They're the ones with the, the brawn and, the extra skills that Izuku's lacking. Like, they make up for each other's weaknesses, and that's what Izuku loves so much about the group of, peers that he ended up forming around himself. Not to mention, he does like Hagakure, and having her in that group definitely is a little bit of a bonus. As for another person who would start getting closer to them, who wouldn't exactly join the group but would just be there, would be Uraraka, who it would become very clear that she might have a little bit of feelings for Bakugo. Now, Bakugo being who he is in this version would definitely take these feelings and would rizz her up to the max. Bakugo being able to, do his thing, and ultimately leading to Bakugo and Uraraka having a more flirtatious relationship by the end of the Forge training camp arc. Ultimately leading to them pretty much making their way towards the provisional license arc, right? Now, during this arc, this is where things are kind of going to begin getting a bit interesting, considering that this would sort of be a little bit of a debut for the team known as the Fantastic Four. They would stay as a squad of themselves, as the rest of UA would like to split up, and so that squad itself would end up taking out as many people as they needed in the ball throwing part, and ultimately when it comes to the rescue portion and facing off against Gang Orca, all four of them working in tandem with each other would have easily been able to take out a pro hero who was in the top 10, mind you. And so this would end up sparking the attention of a lot of heroes and agencies who would think to themselves that having them in their, in their grasps as, interns or like as sidekicks would definitely be a great addition. But Izuku and the Fantastic Four, they're not thinking that. They're thinking a bit further. They're thinking they can take another step in that direction. Maybe be better. And so what would end up happening is that Izuku, once all of them end up passing the provisional license exam and they would find themselves in the class, eventually they would end up being greeted by one of the big three, which would be Mirio, Togata, and then eventually the rest of the big three would arrive. Obviously Nejire and Tamaki, right? With them arriving, Mirio would end up challenging the classroom to a little bit of a 1v everybody, and they would be shocked, especially Izuku, wondering to himself what in the world he's thinking. Like, he can't possibly be serious. And so what would pretty much end up happening is that Mirio goes on and pretty much takes all of them out, with Izuku using Formation B, which is a formation in which Invisible Girl uses a force field around them, and they're pretty much able to just relax in there, leading no harm to be done to the team, and for them to just easily be able to relax and just chill out, you know what I mean? And so with that, what would end up happening is Mirio takes out the rest of the class, and ultimately, once Hagakure notices that Mirio is phasing through the ground, she would worry to herself, thinking that Mirio might just be able to phase in through the force field. And that's exactly what would happen. Mirio's body would phase straight into the force field that they were in, and Kirishima would immediately rush at the direction of Mirio. Mirio, using One For All, since he does become the successor this time, would end up smacking Kirishima so hard that Kirishima would actually feel it, being sent flying into the force field and hitting himself off of it as Hagakure rushes over to him and tries to see if he's okay. Immediately after this, Bakugo would rush in using his flame quirk to pretty much try to hit Mirio, but Mirio, using his phasing abilities, would go right through it and then ultimately hit Bakugo with a bit of an uppercut, which would actually burn Mirio, considering that all of Bakugo's body would be lit ablaze, and Izuku would then be the last one. Mirio pulling up with a 30% smash as he would hit Izuku in the face, whose face would simply shape itself into the shape of Mirio's hand, and Izuku would then wrap himself all over the body of Mirio, only for Mirio to phase in and then rush back in trying to punch Izuku in the eyes or something. But Izuku's eyes would just gouge in and then they would pop right back out, with Izuku looking at Mirio saying it's not fair if he blinds him, and Mirio would say that that's called experience. And from here he rushes in and says power as he punches Invisible Girl, and she's completely knocked out. Izuku seeing this would be like, ain't no way. And so Izuku would go into a bit of a enhanced state in which he would let his blood flow go crazy within his body, making him a lot faster, and Izuku would rush in towards the direction of Mirio, moving twice as fast as he was before. Mirio actually being shocked at the power that Izuku's displaying, and ultimately the battle going on for so long that Aizawa would just call it a draw, considering that Mirio can't hurt Deku, and Deku can't hurt Mirio. So they're kind of at a bit of a standstill, in which Mirio never thought he would find himself with the quirk of One for All, of course. And so what pretty much ends up happening is Mirio would immediately be so excited at the prospect of Izuku being a hero, and Mirio would immediately offer Izuku an internship with Sir Nidai. Now, because of this, Izuku would end up actually accepting, but on the condition that only if all other three of the members of his group are accepted, with Mirio saying he doesn't see why not, and him pretty much giving them all an invite to Sir Nidai's agency for their internship opportunities. Now, what ends up happening this time around is essentially they would find themselves in an alleyway after having passed Sir Nidai's tests. Now, it would be a lot easier considering that none of them are the inheritors of One for All, and so Sir Nidai doesn't already have a vendetta against them, so they would make themselves towards the direction, and having to prove themselves, all they would have to do is pass a little bit of they still do the stamp test, but because of the fact that Sir Nidai is facing off against 4 people at the same time, it would be very easy for them to pass, leading the Fantastic Four to easily go on hero patrol with Mirio, and eventually them having a little bit of an encounter with a small young girl by the name of Eri. Now, Eri would end up pulling up and bumping right into Mirio, who would immediately look at her and see the bandages that are covering her body. Hagakure gasping in disbelief at seeing a little girl with bandage wounds, and then seeing a man coming out of the alleyway, with Hagakure immediately noting who that is, realizing that's Overhaul. Immediately Mirio seeing this would look to the direction of the girl, and feeling her body would notice that she's trembling. Izuku immediately taking notice of this, realizing that this has to be some sort of villain. Izuku looks towards the direction of Bakugo, nodding, as Bakugo would shoot flames at the direction of Overhaul, which he would easily dodge by overhauling the ground and causing the earth to rise up, leading for a force field to, or not a force field, but something to shield the flames to pop up, right? Immediately, Kirishima would try to run in to attack, but Izuku would grab Kirishima by the arm, pulling him back, saying that they don't know what his quirk is, and for now, it'd be best to stay away. Overhaul smirking underneath his mask as Mirio phases underneath the ground and punches Overhaul up straight into the sky, using a 40% One for All smash to his face, leading Overhaul to be sent flying up into the air, and Izuku saying, "Bakugo, now!" with Bakugo shooting a huge flame at the direction of Overhaul, and Izuku then pretty much grabbing Invisible Girl and telling her to put Overhaul in a force field, right? She would do so, and Overhaul would hit the ground with a thud, knocked out completely, as they would have just taken out one of the biggest threats in the normal storyline, easy as cake. With the help of Mirio to pretty much guide them along through the course, that would have been the easiest villain they're probably going to be taking out for now, considering that sooner or later another villain is going to be popping up who's not going to be as easy to handle as many of you guys are probably expecting. Izuku having a lot harder of a time. And so what pretty much ends up going down is they're ending up being congratulated by everything. With all of this happening behind the scenes, All For One would have been working this entire time. Don't think I forgot about him, and don't think that, I didn't forget about that thing that I mentioned in part 2, which is a certain villain is going to be coming into the story, Dr. Doom. He would have been forming with Overhaul giving Wolfram, the villain who can control metals in the movie of My Hero Academia, the ability to actually control metals to a whole new and different degree, making him a lot more powerful than before and giving him an ability in which he can shoot beams of energy at the direction of other people, controlling different abilities and having the power of a lot of different things, right? Dr. Doom's abilities being very, very great and ultimately leading to All For One forming a new, villain who has a bunch of strange abilities, right? Now, obviously, he would be very, very good at combat and stuff like that. He would have amazing intellect, seeing as he would end up getting an intelligence quirk. He would have telepathic abilities, and he would even have a bunch of high-tech weapons, which he's definitely going to be using for the fight when it finally ends up happening. One day, what would end up happening is that Izuku and the group would all be in their training, right? This is after the UA festival would end up happening, where they end up all just pretty much having a little bit of a reunion, and what goes down is actually going to be extremely important to the story. Now, obviously the Gentle Criminal arc does happen, but it's just so unimportant that I don't feel like mentioning it. And so what really we're going to get down to is the day when Class 1A and Class 1B are facing off against each other. It would be on this particular day that All For One would decide to make his move, teleporting straight into the school of UA alongside Dr. Doom, who would easily be able to forge these metals and be able to shoot them at the direction of the people, the students, and end up pretty much taking them out. And by them, I mean like a majority of the students, leading to all of the ones who are more on the combat side to try to face off against All For One and Dr. Doom. All Might noticing this would immediately call to the direction of Mirio, and Mirio and All For One, All Might would be the ones who face off against All For One, with Izuku and the rest of Class 1A being the ones who pretty much end up having to face off against Dr. Doom. Now, Dr. Doom, using his strange abilities, would be able to take out the multitude of Class 1A, leaving only the many strong characters, seeing as it's the Fantastic Four who would have been behind a shield, and also Todoroki, as well as Sato, who would also be there in the case that, the fight needed to be up close. Sato would end up using his quirk Sugar Rush to rush in at the direction of Dr. Doom, trying to punch him, but he would easily get knocked away by a blow from him, as from here, Izuku, noting that he has strength even greater than Sato's, would end up rushing in using his abilities, seeing as he can potentially just negate the abilities of, his blows. And so Izuku would get punched and would actually feel something for once. It would be insane, with Izuku looking to Bakugo and telling him, "Use it now!" Bakugo rushing at the direction of Dr. Doom and beginning to use a flame circle around him over and over until we would hear laughter coming from the direction of Wolfram, who would end up saying, "Child's play," shooting Bakugo far away as Bakugo would land on the ground. And from here, we would have a moment in which Dr. Doom shoots multiple pieces of debris at the direction of the group, leading Invisible Girl to have to put up a force field, turning invisible, trying to go over to Dr. Doom and catch him off guard, maybe knock him out with a powerful blow. But she would be grabbed by the throat, as she would then be lifted up, and he would say, "To truly think that I couldn't see you, foolish little girl," going over to her direction as he would be getting ready to literally snap her neck. And Izuku from here would form a gigantic fist, massive, the size of a building, as he would say, "Hagakure," and she would put up a force field, leading Dr. Doom to turn back and see a giant fist as it would get slammed into him and he would get sent flying into the air. Bakugo then coming right back in with his flame ability, shooting flames at him, and Kirishima jumping up into the air right as he would be about to crash and hit the ground, headbutting him and then going on to punch him in the face, sending him flying back once more. Todoroki then freezing him in place as Bakugo would finally get the chance to go supernova, and he would do so, leading Dr. Doom to immediately be taken care of. After this attack would almost actually end up blowing a part of the city up, had it not been for the fact that Izuku and Kirishima, that Hagakure used their force field to contain the radiation and the force of impact of everything, right? Ultimately leading to Dr. Doom and All For One's simultaneous defeat in the series of what if Deku had rubber quirk, or something like that, right? Or was Mr. Fantastic, or etc., whatever it is, right? But that, ladies and gentlemen, is pretty much where today's video and full series is going to be ending. If you guys enjoyed this video at any point in time, definitely let me know by smashing that thumbs up button and, you know, subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, seeing as your boy is trying to hit 1,000K, 100K subscribers by the end of the year. I know we can do it, guys, so help your boy out. That said, it has been your boy Xehther, and I am out. Peace.